Hi, this is John Records Landecker. Stay tuned. Taped with Rabbi Doug is next.
We're gonna see Rabbi Doug. We're gonna see Rabbi Doug. We're gonna see Rabbi Doug on your TV tonight. But Daddy, I want to watch Monday Night Football.
Forget about Monday Night Football. There's no other thing we're going to watch on Mondays but Rabbi Doug.
Yeah, Rabbi Doug on TV tonight. We're gonna see Rabbi Doug. Oh, everybody talk about Doug.
Shalom and welcome to Taped with Rabbi Doug. Glad you could be with us today. I want to welcome my guest today, Richard Reeder. He is the author of 1001 Train Rides in Chicago. So 1001 Train Rides in Chicago, we're not talking about riding the Metro or riding Amtrak.
No.
We're talking about riding the CTA. We're talking about riding the L.
Yes.
And a little bit of personal experience built into a whole book. First of all, tell me, I really want to know, Richard, what was your motivation to write a book about riding the L and to do this historical fiction, to build the L into characters and situations and life of Chicagoans?
Okay. Well, I've been writing the CTA for the Chicago Transit Authority for maybe 65 years of my life. Even when I lived on the west side until I was 10 years old, I lived around Pulaski and Roosevelt Road. And so, for instance, if I went to Wrigley Field, which I did by public transportation when I was 8 or 9, I would take the Roosevelt Road bus, or it was a streetcar back then, to the Roosevelt subway station, and I would get off at Addison.
So let me tell you.
Yeah.
So my father grew up near 19th and Pulaski,
Okay.
not far from where you were.
Right.
And he did the exact same thing. He's just a few years older
Yeah.
than you. And he actually used to, after school, take the Roosevelt streetcar and get on the L and go to Wrigley Field. And on occasion, he'd shoot out to Sox Park, to Comiskey as well. But he went and he sat in the bleachers for numerous games after school.
Probably for 25 cents or 50 cents.
For 25 cents, that's what he said.
Right.
Amazing.
And the amazing thing was, I was doing this with my friends, and we were 8 or 9 or 10. You imagine now, with some of the parents, what, my 8 or 9-year-old taking the CTA downtown?
Yeah, it's kind of
times have
amazing.
changed.
Kind of amazing. And are those memories vivid in your
Oh,
memory?
absolutely. They were great. They were great memories.
That's so cool.
So I started taking trains on the west side, but then we moved to West Rogers Park, I think a neighborhood that you're familiar with.
I am very well.
Right. And we moved to Lunt and California.
Which is where my synagogue is.
Ezra's Israel.
I was rabbi there for 20 years, and now I'm rabbi across the street in
Okay,
Ormonoro.
okay.
So I was rabbi for 20 years at Ezra's Israel with Rabbi Kaganoff.
Rabbi
memory.
Yes, and Rabbi Kaganoff of blessed memory bar mitzvahed me.
He and I sort of retired together.
Okay.
So that's very
and
nice.
we lived in the co-ops right next
Very
next door.
nice.
Yeah.
Very nice. So tell me about growing up on the west side. You went to school starting on the west side? Where did you go to elementary school?
I went to Bryant Elementary School.
Right, very nice,
Okay.
very nice.
Until 4A.
Okay. And that's when you moved.
And then we moved to West Rogers Park.
And you went to synagogue on the west side as well? That is the old Jewish neighborhood where most of the synagogues in that community now are churches. And have become churches. So when you did this, you
2 years at B'nai Reuben.
Very nice.
Yeah.
And where my father-in-law was actually bar mitzvah.
Okay. Yeah.
Very nice.
And then of course we moved, and I went to synagogue right next door at Ezra's Israel. Yeah.
Wow, very nice. So what was your favorite thing about childhood on the west side?
I think it was a sense of community. We lived in a two-flat, and I remember on summer days, everybody would come out and sit on their steps on the outside. Everybody seemed to know each other. And it was a great sense of community.
So our first family apartment was in the Austin neighborhood on the west side.
Okay.
So I also lived in the west
Yeah.
side for the first 2 years of my life almost. And then when I was 3 years old, we moved to Hollywood Park and,
Yeah.
and so on, moving north also. Tell me, what was your love of the train as a child? Now, I'll tell you my first memories of
Sure.
train. I lived on Central near Lake in Austin on the west side. And my father used to go to work every day on the L, which now is the Green Line, what we would call the Green Line. And I lived half a block away, and at 2 years old, by myself, mind you, you talked about taking the L, I would walk crossing a side street or two and wait at the bottom of the L when I knew that my dad was coming home from work for him to get me. Can you imagine a
Yeah.
2-year-old doing that until between 2 and 3, doing that? And I did. And every day,
Yeah.
I was out there almost for my dad when he got off the train.
Well, taking the train for me, Rabbi Doug, was always an adventure. It was always an adventure. You never quite knew who was going to be on the train. And I didn't want to be rude, but I would occasionally take a glance at some of my fellow passengers and wonder where they were going. Maybe somebody was going to work, maybe somebody was going shopping. So back then I was thinking of, where are people going?
Well, today you see people when you see strange people or unusual people on the train. You see people pulling out their phones and
Yeah.
taking a picture of them, which you couldn't do then. But those memories are with you,
Right.
sort of going
Right.
into a fictional book about people
Yeah.
that you've come in contact with. It's
Yeah,
amazing.
and as I grew up, I went to school at Roosevelt University, and I
My
went.
father also graduated from there.
Oh,
and my
okay.
mother.
We have a lot of
A
things
lot of
in
things in
common.
common.
Yeah. So I went to Roosevelt for 4 years, and of course I took the Lunt Avenue bus to the Morris Avenue train, and I would do that, and then I would work for my uncles during the summers, and they had a restaurant supply business in South Chicago. Now, South Chicago, they had their business at 92nd and Commercial. That's 3,000 east.
Yes.
And I lived 2,800 west and 7,000 north. So I would, when I worked for my uncles, I would basically take the Lunt bus to the
Red Line?
Well, it wasn't called the Red Line.
Right.
Yeah, Howard Englewood back then.
Howard Englewood,
Yeah.
right.
And I would take that to the end of the line, get off at 63rd Street, and then I would take another bus to 92nd and Commercial.
That's wild.
Yeah.
That's wild.
So and I was seeing the whole variety, the diverse group of people that lived in Chicago. So it was a great education for
Now,
me
one
as
of
well.
the things about buses, and I was still a child, I remember this vividly, was that the buses had electric
Oh, yeah.
lines above
Yeah.
the streets.
Trolley cars.
But these were the regular buses.
Yeah,
These were
yeah.
the regular buses that ran on gas.
Right.
They had electric lines above the street, and most of the time, they were using the electricity with these bars going up, and the last thing, still the South Shore train
South Shore had it, yeah.
runs like that,
Yeah.
and the last thing on the north side was the yellow line, what's called the Skokie Swift, ran like that until about 10 years ago or 12 years ago,
Right.
when they removed those and turned
Right,
it into the rest
right,
of the
right.
L, where it ran on the tracks without the electricity up above, but
Yeah.
rather the third rail.
Yeah.
So I also have strong memories about the CTA and the L.
Yeah.
So tell me about who is your most vivid in your memory from writing your book. Who's your most vivid character, and what was their most amazing journey on the L?
Okay, well, for many years I worked in refugee programs. And I worked with a lot of people from different origins. I worked with people back in the 70s that came from Southeast Asia. Then later on, I worked with people that were leaving the former Soviet Union, coming here to Chicago. And then later on, I worked with people leaving Bosnia with the civil war going on there. So I have a character in this book, a Bosnian woman. And she suffered so much. She lost her husband and she lost a child. Again, I created this character, but it was based on some of my actual clients when I worked in the refugee.
That's what historical fiction is.
Yeah.
There's something that you're basing everything on.
Yeah, and what I liked about that client was that character was the resiliency. Somebody who suffered that loss, loss of losing a husband and a child, then coming to a new country, and then making a new life for her own, going to school, and just showing strength and courage. And so, that probably is my favorite.
So where did
character.
she settle? Where did she live? And where did she ride the L to?
Okay, well, she lived in Uptown, as so many new immigrants in Chicago, their first port of entry, certainly since the 60s.
Which the main train in the Uptown today is the Red Line.
Yeah, the Red Line. Yeah, and she, to go to school, she would go to a school in Rogers Park, West Rogers Park, and she'd study accounting there. And then later on, when she got a job, she wound up working downtown. So she would take the Red Line north, and then later on she would take the Red Line south.
So I love that you know the names of the lines before they got colors, because still we call the Brown Line still the Ravenswood.
Yeah.
And but we really don't use the names that we used when I was a kid.
Right.
For the different lines, and you know pretty much all of them.
Yeah,
Right?
and then of course, and then of course the trains used to stop at A and B stations.
Right. Oh, I forgot about that.
Yeah,
I forgot
yeah.
about
So
that.
let's take the Red Line. So the Red Line, if you started on Howard Street on the Red Line, you would skip Jarvis. It depended on if you were on an A or B, because Jarvis would be a B. So then you'd go to Morris, which was A and B, and Loyola was A and B, but Granville was a V, and Thorndale was an A.
Wow, you remember all those things. That's amazing.
And it was a quicker ride because it wouldn't be stopping at every station.
Now tell me if I'm wrong, but I believe I'm right on this, but I'm asking you because of your knowledge. Since the 60s, let's say, when I was growing up, the L has expanded to adding the orange line, which goes to Midway, the pink line, which goes to the southwest.
Yes.
And also the purple line extended into farther into Evanston.
Into Evanston, correct. Yeah, there
So
are
am
a
I
total,
right about
yes,
those three?
there are a total of 8 lines.
8 lines.
8 lines.
8 lines. So the lines that we know growing up in my mind are what's now the red, the blue, and the green. Those are my 3 vivid lines that I know, and the brown, the brown, of course, which is the Ravenswood. So tell me, what was the Ravenswood? Was it always known just as Ravenswood, the brown line?
Yeah.
That's not a change.
No,
and
no,
still, the only one that's really still referred to by its name that I can think of in my mind, the Green Line. What was the Green Line known as?
The Green Line, it started, Jackson Park. Yeah, so they call it Jackson Park or Cottage Grove.
And so when we go to the Red Line, you said that was...
It was called the Howard.
Right, the Howard.
Howard or Englewood.
Englewood.
Because one of it would end in Englewood at Halsted and 63rd Street.
Amazing. And the yellow line was always called the Skokie Swift since it was built.
Yeah.
And do you know when that first went into? I don't ever remember it not being there, but
I think the Swift began in the 50s, the late 50s.
That's why, because I was born in the 60s.
Yeah.
At the beginning of 1960. Yeah. All right. So interesting. So tell me. Let's take someone from a neighborhood that we're not so familiar with, and let's go to southwest. Now, when I was a kid, they extended the lines to 95th, for example, like the Red Line down the expressway.
Right.
They extended the Blue Line to O'Hare, but the Blue Line is an interesting one because it goes in a half circle all the way around.
Yeah, you're going far west. You're going from the far west to downtown, and then basically again you're going west.
So I'm familiar myself with the Green Line going to the west side and going to Oak Park and so on and so forth. Tell me about the Blue Line on the other side. We know the north side and where it goes to O'Hare Airport. What neighborhood is that over there? And who do you talk about that comes from that part of town?
Well, okay. So what you're talking about, the Blue Line pretty much it starts in Oak Park or Forest Park, Cicero, that area. Okay, so
where the Jewish cemeteries are, actually. I know that people, if they need to go there, they've taken the Blue Line and gotten on a bus.
You go to the end, which is in Waldheim, I believe, is in Forest Park.
Right. It is.
So you get off at the end of the Blue Line, And I believe you have to take a bus.
Right, you do have to take a bus. It's a little far. It's a long walk.
To get
if
to
you were to walk.
Waldheim, right.
So tell me about someone who lives out in that area, Forest Park, Berwyn area, and comes on the train. Where are they going? What are they doing? And tell me about one of your characters.
Well, a lot of that area right now. And this is set now in contemporary times.
Right.
So if you look at communities like Cicero and Berwyn, those communities are heavily Latino.
Yes, they are.
Yeah, probably 70 to 80% Latino right now. So you have people, these are blue-collar communities for the most part. So you're talking about low to low
To middle.
middle type of working class people. Men are going to work in factories or they're mechanics. Women are nurses' assistants working in hospitals or nursing homes. So these are the kind of characters, just common folks that I created. Yeah.
Amazing. So let's talk about people on the West Side today because it's common. The West Side is such a mixture because now you have the rehab on the West Side, very close to the United Center,
Right.
and the near West Side, which has been rehabbed, and then you have the old West Side, which is not rehabbed,
Right.
and the neighborhoods have changed. Garfield Park,
Garfield
and
Park
and
and Austin.
Yeah. Tell me about those neighborhoods and the Green Line.
Okay. Well, so I talk. One of the characters that I have in the book is a gentleman that worked at a place called Brock's Candy.
We all have heard.
We
of
all
that.
knew about Brock's
We all heard of
Candy.
that, sure.
Yeah. Now, Brock's Candy at one time employed several thousand people, and my character, his name was James Collins, and James Collins lived in Austin. Okay, he moved in Austin when the neighborhood changed. If you remember Austin in the 50s, in the early 60s, Austin was a neighborhood that was Jewish, Italian, and Irish.
Yeah.
That was a
very much
yeah,
so.
very much so. Then in the 70s and the 80s and contemporary times, the neighborhood is mostly African American. And James Collins was an African American man who had a job at Brock's, and he was making a good living. It was a union job, and he was able to buy a small little house in Austin. And what happened was Brock's, like so many other companies, manufacturing concerns in the States and Chicago, wound up closing. Foreign companies wound up buying Brock's. And they closed the factory. And James Collins, after 20 plus years at Brock's, he had lost his job. So he's a fictional character, but for years I worked at a place in the city, municipal government in the city of Chicago, called the Mayor's Office of Employment and Training. And I was personally involved with working with those people who were laid off at Brock's. So I knew what those people who were laid off, what they were feeling, what kind of emotions they were going through. So it was a very real character for me.
Is there a character in your book that's really you? Are you in your own book? Or do you like mix yourself in with other people?
I mixed myself in with some of with some of the characters. Yeah. So for instance, I'm involved with a club. It's a private club, but it's a club that people that involved in writing and architecture and painting, they're members, but it's an arts club, but also supporters of the arts can join, patrons of the arts. It's called the Cliff Dwellers, and I've been active in the Cliff Dwellers for the last 6 or 7 years. So I created a character who lives in Evanston, who just happens to go down to the Cliff Dwellers, who enjoys the book club that goes on once a month at the Cliff Dwellers, which I just happen to facilitate. So yeah, I throw in a little bit stuff, stuff like that.
That's great. That's great. I got to tell you, you almost think that you are reading biographies of people's lives and how they spend their days when you read your book. So many different people's, your names that match the ethnicity of the person that you're trying to talk about. Let's talk about the Orange Line. Let's talk about people that live near Midway Airport and stuff. Did you talk? Did you think about people who go to work at Midway and people who come from Midway working the other way?
Yeah.
Was this something in your mind when you put your book together? Both directions.
Yeah. Now most of my characters were Chicagoans, but I did create a family that comes from Indianapolis every year. They come, this fictional family. They come from Indianapolis and they take Southwest. In 50 minutes they're in Chicago. and they have this husband and wife have 2 little girls, so they go downtown and they go to they used to go to Marshall Fields. Now it's Macy's around holiday time, so they go to the Walnut Room and they look at the Christmas tree and they buy Frago mints and they have that experience. They look at the windows on State Street.
Sure.
Yeah. So that's a character. But I also talk about changing neighborhoods. So talk about the Orange Line. So the Orange Line goes through Bridgeport.
Yes, it does.
And we remember Bridgeport as being a very segregated neighborhood.
Yes, we do. And Bridgeport, I think, in our minds, for those of us who grew up in Chicago, we think of the Daly family.
The Daly
because
family.
they are the most famous family that lived in Bridgeport.
Absolutely.
And still do.
Yeah.
Still do.
But I still do some work, and I was working with an organization to plan an event. So somebody told me I should go down to the Bridgeport Arts Center to see this venue. This is the old Spiegel warehouse that was reconverted into basically an art center, but they do have a big banquet hall there. And I was walking around the neighborhood. I was walking around Bridgeport, and lo and behold, I started seeing people in the neighborhood walking down streets. I saw that an integrated neighborhood. You saw African Americans, you saw Mexicans, you saw a lot of Asian people, kind of people that used to live in Chinatown. Now they seem to be living in Bridgeport. Quite diverse. And I saw 2 or 3 younger families, young individuals going into a gated community, townhouses in Bridgeport. And I just kind of stood and watched for 15 or 20 minutes, and I saw, wow, I bet about 1/3 of the people that live in this nice townhouse community in Bridgeport are African American. So talk about how a community has changed.
Sure.
Yeah. So what you get in my book is you get the sense of how neighborhoods have changed over the years.
Sure.
So there's a lot of neighborhood anthropology and sociology in the book as well.
You obviously know the routes of the CTA very, very well. Before you did your final edit on your book, did you take a ride from one side to the other of each of these routes so that you would become more familiar?
Yeah,
and
I did.
more
I did.
accurate?
Yes, I didn't know the pink line, for instance. The pink line was the line
Only been on it once.
I knew the least. Yeah, so I wound up taking the pink line a few times and actually got off at a few of the stops to walk around the neighborhoods and see what kind of businesses and shops are around the stations to get an idea. Well, maybe I'll have a mechanic and let me see if he can walk to work. So I was trying to get a sense of the little community around the station.
So amazing, so amazing. Yeah. Do you still love to ride the L?
I do, and the L gets a bad rap, especially some of the concerns right now. And I do talk about concerns. I talk about a young woman who in Rogers Park who is freaked out because there was a murder near the Red Line. A real murder, but she was concerned about the safety of,
Sure.
and so many people do have concerns about safety on the line. So I do talk about it, but I wanted to be. I'm an optimistic person,
Sure.
so I didn't want to talk too much about how bad it was. I just wanted to talk about people and people's optimism and people's struggle to make a good life for themselves in our city. So I think that's what my book basically talks about, people's will. Chicago's the city of I will. And that's one of the wonderful things that I have worked with, in my sense of Chicagoans. People come to Chicago not because of the weather, obviously. They don't come to Chicago because of weather or it's a wonderful place with palm trees. They come to Chicago because they can make a living, their jobs. It's a city with a big heart, too. And I think a lot of the heart in Chicago comes through in some of my characters because that's the kind of people that I've seen through all the various jobs that I've had through my.
Your illustrator, Leonid Osseny.
Yeah.
Who not only drew the cover and things like that, but inside you see some of your characters who actually he
Right.
wrote and drew about. Tell me about him. How did you come across him? How did you find him and put him together with your publication?
Well, it's funny. We have a common interest in the Irish author James Joyce, and he did a bunch of illustrations on James Joyce in the book Ulysses. And I met him for the first time at the Irish American Heritage Center at an exhibit. And I thought I might have been meeting an Irishman, but I wound up, meeting a Jewish man from the former Soviet Union. And Leonid and I and his wife Sonia, we became great friends. We don't live far from each other. And so this is our second collaboration on a book. He's a fantastic artist, and he did a series on Chicago bridges. And I really loved his painting with a CTA train above one of the Chicago bridges. And that's when I said, Leonid, I would love to use that particular painting as the cover.
Oh, very nice. I want to tell you that here you're in the Jewish community, I'm in the Jewish community. We never met before this, and my good friend Rick Kempfer, who is his company is the publisher of your book.
Yeah.
How did you come in contact with Rick? Rick has been on our show before. He's written his own books. He's been on our show when he was in radio. And tell me how you connected with him.
Yeah, well, Rick and and David, they have published several books of friends of mine. Yeah.
Oh, very
so
nice.
when it came time
You
for me,
contacted
I
him, so-
contacted him. I said, I got a story for you, and they liked it.
He
and
found a good one.
Found a good one.
Found a good one.
And
Very
there was a
nice.
shotgun, right?
Shotgun, definitely the matchmaker. If today, any of these people here, if you've ever thought of taking one of your characters, like a spin-off from a TV show, have you ever thought that one of your characters is so unique and so special that you could take them and write a story about them?
Yeah.
Have you?
Yeah, and the funny thing is, a friend of mine who bought the book, he said, I'm going to borrow one of your characters. Would you mind? I said, change the name, okay? But he's trying now to write a novel, kind of a composite of one of my characters.
Very, very nice.
A variation.
This is so amazing. Is there a line on the L that you love more than any others?
I love them all.
You love them all.
Yeah, and they're
You
all
love them
adventures.
Which one do you ride the most often?
I ride the Red Line.
The Red Line.
Yeah.
And me too. That's also the main line. One thing about living on the north side of Chicago, or in the near north suburbs, is that you can come home on an airplane. For $5, you can get on the L at the airport.
Right.
And you can go downtown and transfer to any line.
Yeah.
You can go anywhere on the L. It's really an amazing thing. And I have often gotten home late at night and said, don't wake up, don't come pick me up. I'll get on the L, and I've gotten on the L and transferred to the Red Line and gotten off at the Howard L and gotten on a bus to my house.
Right.
Or if it was too late for the bus, even walked home because it's not that far.
Yeah, and the neat thing about this transit system is not only are on the L, the elevated, but you're often on ground level, and sometimes you're underground.
That's right, the subway, which the Red Line is for a great deal of it. A great deal of it. Do you think that Chicago's transit system is better or worse than systems in places like the Metro in Washington or the subway in New York?
I think it's in similar the way the comfort level. I find the Washington D.C. one to be very nice, or the Toronto, Canada one. But the New York subway, the New York system, kind of reminds me a lot like the Chicago system.
I think that the Chicago system is just much simpler to use.
Yeah.
I can't thank you enough for being on the show.
Well, it was a pleasure being here, Rabbi
Richard
Doug.
Reeder, author of 1001 Train Rides in Chicago. You'll learn a lot not only about your characters, but about Chicago by going through it. I want to thank all of you for being with us. Remember, you can check out our website, www.tvrabbi.com, where you can also see former shows on the web. If you want to email Richard or me, you can email us at info@tvrabbi.com. If you want to know more about his book, I will forward that email to him, and I know he'll get back to you. Richard Reeder, thank you so much for being on the show. Hope to see you all next time right here on Taped with Rabbi Doug. Shalom, everyone.
This has been a Taped with Rabbi Doug production.